Roy, just move here to be able to welcome my very, very great panel. And I'm very privileged to be here tonight. As it has been announced, the session that we are going to have is going to focus on landscape, forest, and food. And of course, in preparation with tomorrow's more bigger discussion on food systems. But let's start it today. Allow me to just mention a couple of things. One, the way we use our land to produce food and other goods and services are responsible for just under a quarter of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. Another point here to note is that within this segment, the most significant contributor are deforestation and agricultural emissions from livestock, soil, and nutrients. And all of this happens within a landscape where you have people, where you have investments, and where you have all these other things happening. It is also important to note that land, where climate change has its most considerable immediate effects on people's livelihoods, is a topic and a core topic of this conversation. Landscape restoration, as has been already mentioned by previous sessions, and regenerative agriculture are key interventions to bridge the conservation and food security, food systems gap in this conversation. Importantly, it can help overcome historical, administrative, and sectorial silos that affect actually the delivery of a proper and sustainable landscape restoration and food systems. In this plenary, therefore, we will discuss solutions for managing landscapes. We will discuss and be able to listen from experts the practical live examples where it has worked. But also, we will be, again, touching quite strongly the food system transformation. Allow me to mention that there is a question that we put on the Slido. Please, if you can go on Slido and use the hashtag GLF to access that. The question is that simple, but we want to hear what you think. 1, 2, 3 words, just describe for you what are the key driving forces for sustainable food systems from a landscape perspective. And without further ado, allow me to welcome my great panelists for tonight, and which really I'm very privileged to moderate this session and very happy because it's a very outstanding panel, I tell you. And my first panelist is Dr. Carlos, trained electronic engineer, but actually ended up becoming a climate passionate scientist, mostly working on climatology, focusing on the Amazon region, which is one of the major topic that has been discussed in the COP throughout. But also, importantly, it's a privilege actually to have Carlos on this panel because Carlos is the best known Brazilian scientist in terms of climate, global warming, and other climate science in Brazil. So, Carlos, you're welcome. He's online, and he will be talking to us shortly. The second panelist is Stephenson, a colleague of mine based in Switzerland, the chair of the IUCN Species of Survival Commission, but also a passionate practitioner on monitoring and building result-based management, and much of his work really has focused on corporate biodiversity performance. And welcome, Stephenson. And actually, Stephenson also is online. My third panelist is Stig, a very seasoned climate scientist and professional, but also a politician, definitely. He has been an ambassador in Indonesia for Norway, but also worked very much with Norwegian government agencies for development cooperation up to now. And he's here today with us. Welcome, Stig.
Thank you.
Also present here in the room is Jennifer, former WRI Global Director of Climate Program, but also currently Jennifer is the Executive Director of Greenpeace International. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And then the privilege to have on video recorded message Vendana. I love her final introduction statement. She said, "I don't want to live in a world where 5 giant companies control our health and our food." You can know more about Vandana in the next couple of minutes. And then finally, a very seasoned leader, Philippe Kwitonda from Government of Rwanda, who is the Director General of Land, Water and Forestry. Those 3 key important topics we'll be talking about. Also, who has worked on many projects in terms of policy influence, policy setting, and also other action on the ground. So welcome my panelists, and I will go back to my seat and ask the first question to our great panelist, Dr. Carlos. Dr. Carlos, while carbon market and zero deforestation commodity pathways and other approaches can help reduce deforestation and generate economic prosperity, it has not stopped actual deforestation in the Amazon region. We are still seeing that. What has changed? What has to change? And if we have to see or to reach that actually challenge of stopping deforestation in the Amazon. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening to all. Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. I will try to answer your question at the end, but let me just say the traditional food systems in the Amazon are cattle, ranches, and soy are really putting the Amazon at the risk of a tipping point. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I just want to announce, I'm summing it up, one of the key conclusions of the science panel for the Amazon, a group of more than 200 scientists and indigenous leaders, other stakeholders, put together a report to be released in November 12th at COP at 2 p.m. So this report makes a summary of the rigorous scientific assessment and also promotes sustainable pathways for the future of the Amazon. So, but let me say briefly, the Amazon forest has evolved over millions of years, and it's tremendously efficient in recycling nutrients over mostly very nutrient-poor soils, recycles water very efficiently, very short dry season, very humid microclimate, and 35% of the rain in the Amazon basin is caused by this recycling, very efficient. So this maintains the most biodiverse forests, tropical forests as biodiverse as Congo Basin, tropical forests, and Southeast Asia. And also 200 billion tons of carbon stored in the biomass. And that's the way this evolved. Indigenous people have been there for 12,000 years, and they kept the forest standing. They changed the forest. They developed a very diverse biocultural way of life until recently, until the last 50 years, when there is all these anthropogenic drivers of change, mostly the traditional food systems, and they cut down. Today, it's up to 17%, over 1 million square kilometers. And for instance, in the Brazilian Amazon, there is a law in the 1920s that said you can not cut the Brazil nut tree. And so people keep the Brazil nut tree that you can see here. But however, the pollinators for the Brazil nut are no longer there in a pasture. So there is no production. Just to give you, and also, of course, these food systems starting in the 70s, and of course, it created a road infrastructure in the Amazon, and you can see the deforestation exploding. 5.5 0.5 kilometers on both sides of roads represent 95% of deforestation. And this is all types of, this is a type of 100 hectare plots for farmers, hundreds of thousands migrated to the Amazon, and also big cattle ranches. So you can see this high level of deforestation induced by government policies of Amazonian countries, extractivist industries. And this is you can see the data, the deforestation data up to the year 2000 to 2018, mostly over southern Amazon near the Andes. So 17% is cleared, and another 17%, over 1 million square kilometers, in several stages of degradation. So basically, the traditional food system in the Amazon is to transform the Amazon, a global farm, mostly for soy, and Brazil is the largest exporter of soy, mostly as animal feed to Europe, to Asia, and also a global cattle range. 90% of the deforested area is for a pasture and a very low productivity. So this is really devastating the Amazon. So basically, what we say, we are very close to this tipping point in which the forest will only remain near the Andes, about 30% maximum. 70% will become a degraded ecosystem, open canopy degraded ecosystem, as you can see in the photo there. And we are already seeing this feedback, very positive feedback leading to the tipping point. Tree loss, less evaporation, decreased rainfall, longer dry season. The dry season in southern Amazon is 3-4 weeks longer today compared to the 80s. Less humidity, more fires. Fires are propagating the forest for millions of years. Fires were not propagating in the forest. And then tree loss. And that's going on, and we are very close. This is an animation, what might be this, the risk of this quote-unquote savannization, this very degraded open, remaining only 30%. Many studies show we are at the edge. We are at the edge of the cliff for this tipping point. And if we cross, it's going to be perhaps an emission of 300 billion tons of carbon dioxide, making almost impossible. This is a tipping element of the Earth system, making almost impossible to reach the Paris Agreement to 1.5 degrees warming in these 2 weeks. We are all discussing these issues in Glasgow, and if we lose the Amazon, impossible to keep 1.5 degrees. So we need really to stop deforestation, degradation, government commitments, and we saw on Tuesday, this signing of many tropical countries for zero deforestation before 2030. This is a very difficult challenge, but we need that. Restoration, we have to restore, and of course, developing a new bioeconomy, we call a healthy standing forest and flowing rivers bioeconomy. And of course, we have many good examples, for instance, the acai berry, which brings more than $1 billion, mostly to people managing agroecological systems. There are many of those all over the Amazon. And one hectare of an agroecological system in the Amazon producing more than 100 products, they generate about $1,000 a year per hectare. And when you compare to soy in the Amazon, this is $200 per hectare per year. Cattle, $100 per hectare per year. So there is a tremendous possibility of this standing forest, flowing rivers, bioeconomy. The potential is gigantic. And so I want to end with this message. We need to value traditional knowledge. We need to value the knowledge of local communities, and also how to merge that with modern science, with innovative technologies to add value to the products of the forest. We have to have a moratorium on zero deforestation, forest degradation, wildfires immediately in areas near tipping points, and also before 2030 of all of the Amazon forest. And we need to finance this new bioeconomy, which will maintain the forest, maintain the carbon stocks, maintain biodiversity, and maintain the well-being of the indigenous people and the local population. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that's a very powerful fact and definitely a call to action for the Amazon. That needs to happen, not waiting for tomorrow, but just starting now. And this leads me to the second question to Steve. And we saw already from Carlos the current situation of the Amazon and the call to immediately stop deforestation. But there's still a number of challenges. And my question to you, Steve, I know you are very much invested in developing monitoring tools, but also you are leading the IUCN Species Monitoring Specialist Group. Human-caused fragmentation of habitats compounds the problem caused by climate change. What role can agricultural systems play in restoring and protecting natural habitats, of course, such as Amazon, but also we talked about the Congo Basin, but also other intact forests that exist, which we are losing at a very high rate. Over to you, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Well, what I will do, I will share my screen. What I will do is start by giving a little bit the context for your question. So everybody at this meeting knows there is a climate crisis. But there is also a biodiversity crisis. Wildlife populations have been declining for decades, and the conservation status of species from a range of taxa continues to get worse and worse. As a result, we are seeing more and more species going extinct. On top of that, climate change is adding to the problem and is disrupting species communities, further putting at risk the ecosystems that we all depend on. Forests, as you said, continue to decline. Forest loss, degradation, and fragmentation is occurring worldwide, but the biggest deforestation fronts are in tropical countries. And of course, that's also where you find most of the biodiversity and where you find most of the world's poorer people. What is quite alarming, though, is that 80% of global deforestation is directly attributable to agriculture. Now, if we look at the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species to get a further idea of what's happening to threatened species, that also shows that the biggest risk of extinction for tropical or for threatened forest species worldwide is agriculture. Now, what we often forget is up to 90% of terrestrial organisms spend part of their life cycle in soil habitats. And so soil biodiversity is often impacted by agriculture as well, but is often forgotten. So how can we address this issue? Well, the global environmental governance context at the moment is quite favorable, and there are some suggestions. The Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, for example, proposes that for sustainable agriculture, we use sustainable and biodiversity-friendly practices, we conserve habitats in and around production systems, and we restore damaged and fragmented habitats. Now, if you add to that the opportunity we've got at the moment with the new 2020 global biodiversity targets being set and several global and regional initiatives to promote restoration, then we are in a global policy context at the moment that should set the scene nicely to make agriculture more sustainable. But what tools and approaches can we use to actually get that done? Well, one of the key tools at the moment is regenerative agriculture. This is an approach that focuses on reduced tillage and agrochemical use, crop diversification, agroforestry, mulching, and water conservation. And while this has some biodiversity benefits, it also sequesters carbon and provides financial and crop yield benefits to farmers. And a report that has literally just been published shows very clearly that looking at regenerative agriculture projects in Africa, farmers are seeing increased yields of between 15 and 170%. So there are benefits to farmers and yield from following these sustainable practices. But we also need to complement and encourage regenerative agriculture. We also need sustainability standards, certification and labeling to provide a way of tracing and verifying supply chains. But that in itself won't be enough. We also need broader conservation efforts in and around agricultural land. And here we need to try sustainable forest management, forest landscape restoration, and also establish and manage protected and conserved areas. Now, let me just give you an example from coffee, which is a commodity I know well myself. The main approach for sustainability in recent years has been through standards and certification. And if you look across the schemes that are out there, most of them push for reduced use or no use of agrochemicals and better management of water and waste, which is very much in line with the regenerative agriculture approach. But what these schemes also promote is protection and restoration of water, species, and habitats. Now, sustainable agriculture, these practices do work. And I've seen it for myself. I took all of these photographs on coffee farms. Biodiversity can thrive if agricultural land is managed properly. But what we also tend to forget is biodiversity in turn helps agriculture. And when you look at coffee, for example, bees and trees actually help improve coffee yields in many contexts. But there are challenges. There is inconsistency in definitions and approaches. People use the term regenerative agriculture in different ways, and only a quarter of them directly reference biodiversity. There's also a limit to what you can do at the farm level. We need to move to landscape approaches to ensure connectivity and biodiversity outcomes at scale. And we've also got an issue. At the moment, there's a lot of tree planting in landscapes. Most of it, however, is for carbon and agroforestry. The broader benefits may be actually minimal if the right trees are not planted in the right place by the right people at the right time for the right reasons. And that's a lot of things to get right. And last but not least, in my opinion, we need to be better at demonstrating the value of these approaches to people and biodiversity. And we're not going to do that until we get better at monitoring outcomes and impacts. So just to let you know, there's hope here. There are lots of initiatives that are showing the way forward. Landscale is a relatively newer framework that assesses sustainability performance at the landscape level. And we're also seeing a number of landscape level partnership platforms, such as these two in South America, that bring together stakeholders for integrated management of agricultural landscapes. I'd also be remiss if I didn't note that there are two new sets of IUCN guidelines relevant to the agricultural sector as well. Nature-based solutions help the environment while delivering sustainable benefits for people, and the IUCN standard for nature-based solutions emphasizes the need for net gain to biodiversity, but also makes it very clear we need to set measurable goals and then measure delivery periodically. We've also just recently released IUCN guidelines for planning and monitoring corporate biodiversity performance. And this basically takes companies through a 4-stage process where they unpack what biodiversity means for them and their supply chains in their scope of influence, and helps them set realistic and measurable goals and objectives, but then more importantly, shows them how to measure key indicators where they can scale up their performance from site level or farm level up to corporate level. And we know this works in the agricultural sector because we developed and tested these guidelines for coffee with Nespresso. So just to finish, I'd also just like to flag a new initiative that the University of Lausanne and Species Monitoring Specialist Group are starting. We have a project with a large number of partners around the world where we are going to look at the blockages to biodiversity data. And we hope the results of this are going to help sectors, including agriculture, assess the data and tools they need for sustainable results-based management of biodiversity. So in conclusion, and in answer to your question, Charles, protecting biodiversity and ensuring food security are part of a single agenda. I'd reiterate a point that is already well made. But to ensure biodiversity conservation in agricultural landscapes works, stakeholders need to work together to plan and implement conservation actions at the landscape level. They need to harmonize definitions and approaches. They need to consider protected areas as integral parts of agricultural landscapes. And they need to restore habitats, not just plant trees. And I think last but not least, we need to monitor key biodiversity indicators to prove the concepts, to prove what aspects, which of these approaches works, to test our assumption and measure outcomes and impacts. And I think if we can do that, if we can demonstrate how these approaches work, if we can convince people to adopt them, then we have hope of feeding the world's population and at the same time conserving biodiversity in agricultural landscapes and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I think I like how you closed your statement. That's actually, Steve is a very optimistic person and very positive. I like the fact that you are giving us hope. There is hope. And I think that's the message the COP26 is giving us. There is hope. Yes, the problems and challenges are there, but there is hope that we can bring back this. So, and this leads me to Stig. And Stig, you are working for NORAD as Director of Climate and Energy, but also you have previously been in the International Cooperation. There's a broader consensus, and I think Steve also mentioned that there are tools, there are concepts, the science is there. But what we are saying is that regardless of recognizing that international level, climate and biodiversity crisis actually globally depends on local solutions. However, we know that, but what we see in a contrary to that solution is that research and also knowledge development and tools are literally driven by institutions based in Europe and Latin America and North America. So what are the opportunities really to remove these imbalances and bring that connection between the science and the local knowledge on this question? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. I'm going to move over there and use the clicker. So thank you so much for inviting me here. It's great to be here. I just came from the COP now. And I think, as has been alluded to, there is development in the sense that for a long time, nature was sort of absent in climate discussions. And when it was discussed, it was as an afterthought. This is changing. I think the idea that nature, climate, agriculture is intrinsically connected is coming, and it's coming to the COP, and you see it also in other fora. Another sort of mega trend, which I think is positive, is that in all international settings, indigenous peoples are much better organized, they're getting heard, and they're proposing solutions. It will be up to us to try to respond, because I think they have made a challenge to us. How do you want to work together? As was alluded to, one of the problems that we have, the clicker is not really there. There we have it. Is where does the knowledge come from, and what does the knowledge focus on? This is what the world map would look like if it was according to research publications. So as you will see, North America is well represented. Europe is extremely overrepresented. Asia, parts of Asia is underrepresented, while China is doing quite well. Africa is really underrepresented in terms of knowledge production and focus. This is, of course, important for solutions, but it also sort of shows a tilt, which is in terms of investment, in terms of other areas, it's quite representative of the problems that we face. One of the things we can try to do is to make more knowledge easily available. This is just one example. We are quite proud of it. We don't think it's the solution of everything. But since last year, Norway has bought satellite imagery of the entire world from 30 degrees north to 30 degrees south. It is available for free for any development or research purpose. So that democratizes to some extent the access to one important input to knowledge production when it comes to land use change, and so on. You can go to nicfi.no or planet.com if you want to look more at the accessibility of this data. Another initiative that we have that tries to address some of this imbalance is the CAFI initiative, the Central African Forest Initiative. As many of you are well aware, the second biggest rainforest in the world is in Central Africa. According to people in Central Africa, it's also the most biodiverse. I'm sure there are discussions around this, which is the most biodiverse. But it's an extremely important forest, not only for the people who live there, not only in terms of climate, but also in terms of local weather systems. If the Central African rainforest shrinks, it will affect rain patterns all over Africa. It will affect agriculture all over Africa. We are trying to see how we can form coalitions that work in a different way. Recently, the LEAF coalition was solved. We are proud of that. We don't think it's the solution to everything. But the LEAF coalition has a number of countries involved. It has a number of big companies involved. And I think this is an important development, that the big companies are also realizing that they both need to contribute and need to do things differently. So this coalition plans to put $10 billion to the use of reducing tropical deforestation. A large portion of that money will try to be directed towards indigenous peoples. So we think this is an important initiative. We think also there's a need for similar initiatives in other sectors. It is interesting to think of, as Steve and Carlos pointed to, agriculture is the big driver. Where is the big coalition on a different kind of agriculture? Well, maybe somebody is working on it now. Let's hope so. The Food Summit earlier this year, again, positive indications. In the indigenous peoples' food systems were to a large extent recognized as one of the game-changing solutions. I think Steve pointed to this also. Agroforestry, you can produce, and also Carlos, you can produce things on intact, on biodiverse land in a different way. Increasingly, it's being recognized, but still, sort of the main feature of our agricultural system is to produce lots of one thing in one place and produce lots of it to another part of the world. So the challenge is still out there. IPCC reports, I think, positive developments. It's a little more balanced than the total research. I think we need to keep working on that. It will be interesting to see the results of these upcoming reports, because I think they will really point to the fact that food systems is at the core of what needs to change. Indigenous peoples will be at the core of the solutions. And we all need to think about how we consume, travel, eat, buy. I see my time is up. Thank you for your attention so far, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stig. I think I remember quite a number of years ago, I worked for an organization which used to have a motto which says, no small change. I think every action counts here. And that brings to you, Jennifer, very close to me. Natural ecosystems and landscapes are going to play a critical role in keeping us under 1.5 degrees. And this is why COP26 is here. And of course, we need transformation. We talked about transformation in food, in landscapes, in leadership, in technology. And then I want to pose this question to you. If we have to reach this ambition, what kind of transformation do we need at food systems and commodity sector level to really keep that climate and bring it at 1.5 degrees? Over to you, Jen.
Great question. I'll do my best. Big question. First of all, I just want to say it's a real pleasure to be here. And Carlos and Steve, I wish you were here with us in person, but I'm glad to be sharing a panel with such prestigious individuals. And just want to share a few thoughts from the Greenpeace perspective. I mean, you mentioned it, we are in a climate emergency. Children born today are going to be facing unprecedented heat waves and droughts, rainfall, storms, and floods in their lifetimes, many times more frequent, more intense than what we experience right now. And this has a huge influence on the health and the significance of the health for natural ecosystems and for food production. And you just had to listen to the strikers in the streets today to know what's at stake for them. And we're in this very dangerous predicament where we are breaching the safe operating space for life on Earth. And deforestation for commodities contributes to all 4 of the planetary boundary offshoots. So we need to protect what protects us. Halting the destruction of natural ecosystems and the expansion of agriculture, protecting and restoring nature obviously are critical, as we have heard. And indigenous peoples and local communities all through the tropics are battling for their rights and their survival. But also in the north, Sami communities in Sweden, and commodity production is a major cause. It's a land grab with hostile law and regulation changes. As we've heard, the food system is responsible for about 80% of deforestation, with livestock and animal feed expansion most prominent, 50 million hectares of forest loss for commodity production in the last 10 years. Just stunning. And so one piece of the transformation is really about less meat and dairy means less heat and climate change, deforestation and biodiversity loss, and better water quality and human health. And global meat and dairy production and consumption has to be cut by half by 2050. You hear these other long-term goals. This is a key one for this transformation. We think we don't need, actually, any more non-binding declarations and fake pledges. But we need action. We need finance, we need monitoring, and we need enforcement. And these Glasgow forest deals, they give the impression of progress and ambition, but past experience, we know, has shown that we can't trust them. And it only took 1 day for Indonesia to backpedal and say, they're not going to be stopping deforestation. So we need to shift the trillions of dollars per year out of the fossil fuels and perverse agricultural subsidies into the protection and restoration of nature. And polluters need to pay for their ecological debt. And we have to address carbon offsets. Offset projects, they're distorting landscapes and rights and livelihoods. They take land needed for food. They unjustly transfer addressing global north pollution to landscapes in the global south. They distort land tenure and often fail to respect rights. They treat nature as a commodity, and tree planting is often in monocultures. This has been going on since as long as I've been in this debate, from Kyoto until today, documented in the literature, investigations demonstrating this. It just hasn't changed. And so carbon offsets really, they're not only a scam, but they threaten food security. If tree planting to offset fossil fuel pollution is used, Food prices could raise by 80% by 2050, according to Oxfam this year. And massive areas of land are going to be needed. For example, the plans of 4 major oil companies, Shell, BP, Total, Eni, they would require an area twice the size of the United Kingdom for just their offsetting plans. What do we need? We need action for transformation. We need protection, restoration, and reforestation, but no offsetting for credits, no plantation planting for offsets. Nature carbon removal is additional, not instead of stopping fossil fuel carbon emissions. We're in a climate emergency. We need annual reduction rates of 7%, and offsetting can blow that out of the water. We need less meat, less heat, reducing meat and dairy by half globally and replacing with crops focused on food and not biofuels or energy crops. Billions of dollars and euros for protection and restoration of nature via a rights-based approach and benefits to local communities, monitoring and multi-stakeholder mechanisms for delivering it. And commodity systems need radical transparency. We've heard some of the tools that are out there, but in monitoring and traceability, reporting, and verification of progress. And finally, we need, in this action for transformation, ecological farming and forestry, healthy for the planet and for people. Zero gross deforestation, such as via the HCS approach, and no natural ecosystem conversion for commodities. A focus on products and ecosystem services from the forest. And a rights-based integrated landscape management approaches that put indigenous peoples and local communities at the center and recognize them as the guardians of the forest that they are. So that's what I would do for a transformation, and I think that's the challenge that we have today, that we have to meet with all of our minds, hearts, feet, head together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. This is so inspiring, Jennifer, and very action-oriented. I want just to invite you to follow a video recorded from our friends Vandana Shiva, who is a scholar and environmentalist from Asia, from India, just sharing some of the practical realities of this challenge around food supply and how India actually can contribute to this. Please.
My greetings from India on 2 issues that have preoccupied me for such a large part of my life: the issue of forests and the issue of food. Forests is where I was born. I was born in the cradle of the Himalayan forest. I worked with the beautiful movement called Chipko, which was a movement to protect the Himalayan forests when the landslides started and the destruction started. But I have, over these many decades, nearly 5 decades now, not just studied forest systems, food systems, their biodiversity, but also the paradigms that are leading to their destruction. I have been in the spice gardens of Kerala and Karnataka in the Western Ghats. You can't distinguish the forest from the spice gardens. And yet, these were the sources of wealth of India. The spice gardens are what led to Columbus setting sail from India, but he found land in the middle, or the East India Company for the Dutch and the British being created, all for spices. Thousands of years India had exported spices with 1 bag of pepper being weighed for its weight in gold. That's why we were 25% of the world economy. So it's not the case that trade begins with World Trade Organization and globalization. International trade is ancient. And international trade determined by sovereignty of communities, of cultures, of countries. Make sure that people have their food, nature has her biodiversity, and there is international trade, not at the cost of the food security of the people or ecological security. I have watched how our forests went as they were redefined into timber mines, and monoculture started to substitute the rich diversity of forests that my sisters in Chipko were defending. I have watched how our rich biodiverse agriculture, which was like the forest, as Sir Albert Howard recognized when he was sent to India in 1905, Indian farms are as permanent as the forests. And my dear beloved late father, who was a forest officer, used to tell us when we were children, there are more trees on the farms of Uttar Pradesh, the big province of northern India, where he was, than there are in the forests of Uttar Pradesh. So there was no divide between farms and forests. There was no divide between people and nature. These divisions are very, very colonial in their roots. And it is now time to overcome and transcend these divisions, overcome and transcend divisions and extractivism as the economy that is making the majority of ecosystems poorer, that is making communities poorer. And we need to pause and take reflection. Where are the emissions coming from? The rich industrialized world, 1%, is emitting 50%, and the excess emissions beyond the share, 95% are the rich countries. These issues of climate justice are, of course, what are at stake at COP26. But if you look at the other side of the picture, where's biodiversity? Rich. In the 22% of the land left with indigenous people. The whole planet was indigenous. The whole planet was biodiverse. The whole planet had food for all beings. And now only 22% is left, but that is where the biodiversity is being conserved. So we need to redefine our notions of the wild. Wild is defined in the colonial dictionary as a place without people. Every place with biodiversity, every place with wilderness is a place where caring, compassionate, loving people are. We need to learn from indigenous people. We need to learn from women how we can create economies that do not destroy the earth, do not push biodiversity extinction, do not destroy the climate systems of this planet and bring us to collapse. It's in our hands. It's in our hands if we turn to the earth and our biodiversity. We turn to the forests as our teachers, to the plants as our teachers, and we turn to all of humanity as one family. We turn to all of the biodiversity as one earth family, just as we must regenerate biodiversity. And this is what I do day in and day out through Navdanya, the movement I have built over the last 37 years. And we are growing more food. We have more soil fertility. We have more nutrients in the soil. We have water tables rising 70 feet. We have pollinators, even though we didn't start pollination conservation, we just saved seeds. Saving seeds of food sovereignty, saving seeds of seed sovereignty, saving seeds of biodiversity is enabling us to solve all the problems that the planet is facing. And it begins with our forests and farming like the forest, and doing economic systems like the forest. Forests are based on diversity. As Tagore said, we have learned democracy from our forests. And economic democracy rests on the biodiversity of economies, not globalized economies in the hands of a few corporations wiping out local economies and leaving destitution everywhere, but prosperous local economies everywhere, and high value goods trading to make everyone benefit, not a few at the cost of the many. We are at an exciting moment for the evolution of humanity. We can either choose the path of extinction, continue extinction of other species and ensure our own, or rejuvenate not just our biodiversity, but our economic models, our paradigms, our values. We can move from greed to care. I'm so glad I was able to join you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you agree with me that this is very inspiring and mind-blowing to listen to these powerful speeches and this presentation. And there's a whole issue around leadership that we kept talking about. The role of leadership and steering and this transformation that we are looking at. And I'm very happy to have a colleague of mine and a very good friend, Philippe, who is the Director General of Forest, Land and Water within the Ministry of Environment in the government of Rwanda. Philippe, I will just definitely ask a question to you very happily around the advance of the government of Rwanda on land use, the governing land use in ways that balance goals from different sectors, infrastructure, agriculture, environment, but also investments and resettlements. And in a country like Rwanda, where we have more than a 12 million population on a 26,000 square kilometer, how did Rwanda do it? Rwanda committed 2 million hectares. Can you share this learning, this leadership on cross-sectoral approach within Rwanda and how that helps in restoration and break silos?
Yes, thank you very much. It is my pleasure to be with you all. Before I go to the question itself, I would say that it is also a big pleasure today because during this week, government of Rwanda has also hosted a conference on land policy in Africa, which has also attracted around 3,000 persons. It was also a very interesting thing to note during this event. Come back to the question, maybe the starting point is itself land. Land, it is a common heritage. It is a potential that we need to protect at all costs. Taking the example of Rwanda from 2019, government of Rwanda has revised land policy, and now the land policy we're having in Rwanda is articulated around two main pillars. One is about land administration. This means how people can have rights to their land in terms of legalization. The other pillar is about land use planning. I think the question you asked fit properly with this component of land use planning. So land use planning is very important to balance all needs because land is needed by different sectors. We talk about agriculture, we talk about urbanization, and as you know, urbanization is putting much pressure on most other different sectors. So that is the reason why when you're having a land use plan, it helps you to balance all these different uses. To take an example for Rwanda, we have given 30% of our land for forest. So this is a very important figure. 30% of Rwandan territory is reserved for afforestation. So there is also land for agriculture, of course. There is also land for different purposes. And these different type of lands are used by different institutions, as you said. And all these institutions, land use planning help to align these institutions. Instead of conflicting over the use of different over the use, these institutions are aligned and don't conflict, but they do some kind of there is some kind of complementarity between these different uses. So I think the most important thing of this session is about forest. I may want to focus on forest. As I said, 30% of national territory is for forest. So forest is very important, and we need to do our best to ensure forest is well protected. As you know, forest is source of water. So there is no way you can protect water resources if we don't protect forest. There is no way you can protect the land itself if we don't plant forest. So we are talking about climate change, If we don't plant enough forest, definitely we will not be able to manage carbon we are emitting. Forest is also about biodiversity. Forest is about tourism. Forest is also about economy. So because there are different elements, different furnitures you can make from forest. Forest is also about food. I am very glad that this topic we're talking about try to link landscape, forest, and food. Forest is about medicine. Forest is about cultural services. There are recreational services. Professor Carlos talked about Ario River. So forest is about rain. If we don't protect our forest, if we don't protect our landscape, definitely we are going to lose all these services. And then if we lose all these services, definitely we have a different problem. The key issue now is how do we involve communities? Taking example from Rwanda, 70% of forests we're having in Rwanda belongs to communities, belongs to individual persons. Do people understand the role of forest? How our policies are involving community in terms of forest management? How do persons get involved in the protection of forests? So these are the key questions that we should have to make sure we have innovative policies that help us to drive all these processes or to link all these processes so that people can understand there's a linkages between the landscape and the forest, and also about food. So there are different things we can talk about in terms of land use planning, but the most important one is that they help aligning these uses instead of conflicting them. So my key message, if I can say, is that we need to plant forests, especially youth. Let us plant forests at our schools. Let us plant forests at our universities. Let us plant forests at our churches or mosques. Let us plant forests at our supermarkets. Let us plant trees at our homes. So I think we need to plant trees almost everywhere because trees are becoming very, very important for the survival of human beings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Philip. A round of applause. I have to say that I'm struggling to summarize this panel. Everything was so important, so inspiring. But a couple of things just to reflect on. We heard a lot about food sovereignty, regenerative agriculture, food system transformation, landscape restoration. We heard about knowledge management, knowledge sharing, indigenous knowledge. We heard about rights of farmers. We heard about land use planning, leadership in this. But more importantly, we also heard about the hope that we all have of a transformed landscapes. And I think to close this session, with many thanks to our great panelists, the challenges are there. Land is degrading at a very fast rate in Africa, in Central America, in Asia, all over the world, in Europe. And I was looking at the number of statistics for Africa. Over 650 million people, livelihoods is under stake if we don't invest in restoration and proper management of this. But there is hope again. Agroecology is uptaking. It's a reality, it's happening. Regenerative agriculture, a recently study by IUCN and other partners showed that actually regenerative agriculture can increase 68 to 300% of production. This is a study done by Vivid Economics, and you can look up it online, etc. But also, we saw the role of the science, the knowledge, but also the tools. So all this together, I have to mention that we have everything you need. This COP showed us that we even have money, we have finance, because I mean, deforestation, stopping deforestation attracted a significant amount. 100 billion is already getting. So finance is also there. Now I think, as Jennifer said, we just need action. As Stig said, as Carlos said, as Stephen said, we just need to go out there and take action, and no small change. With that, I want to thank you very much, panelists, for your great knowledge, and also the audience online and here in the room, and wishing you all a very, very good evening. Thank you.
Welcome, ma'am.
For the current climate crisis, but who will ultimately inherit the consequences of any failure to deliver a safer, fairer and greener world, are watching us and hold us all to account, and quite rightly so. We are all agreed it is vital that COP26 delivers solutions and hope for the future. No doubt you will be heartened by the pledge made earlier this week, right here in Glasgow by world leaders, to end and reverse the deforestation by 2030. Glasgow is also determined to do its bit. I'm proud that Glasgow is the first city in the UK to declare a climate emergency. We've reduced our CO2 emissions by more than 40% since 2006, and we're on course to reach our target of net zero by 2030. You may know, thank you. You may know that Glasgow is a city referred to as the Dear Green Place on account of the high proportion of parks and green spaces found across the city, spaces our citizens so cherish and enjoy daily. We recognise the value of parks and green spaces, quality spaces and woodlands, and we're so keen to build on these positive assets by making nature more accessible to Glaswegians to help improve both their mental and physical health, a priority more than ever as we recover from the pandemic. Friends, to finish, I wish you well in this valuable work that you do. I'm confident that you've experienced a warm welcome by Glasgow and our citizens, and will continue to do so over the next few days. Please enjoy the hospitality you're about to receive this evening, and on behalf of the Lord Provost once again, welcome and enjoy your time here. Thank you.